His mother was draped over his chest, screaming at me to bring him back, while the monitor above his bed drew a flat green line I had no right to erase. The DNR order was valid. His signature was still fresh in the chart, and I had less than a second to decide whether mercy looked more like action or restraint. But it started hours earlier, when he walked into my already exhausted by a battle he had stopped calling hope. Subscribe for more medical stories like this. I first saw Daniel Mercer just after midnight, when the ER had settled into that strange hour where everything looked slower but felt more dangerous. The fluorescent lights painted everyone the same tired shade, and the smell of antiseptic clung to the air so heavily it almost tasted metallic. Daniel sat bent forward in a wheelchair, one hand pressed to the left side of his abdomen, the other curled around a paper vomit bag he hadn't used yet. He was only 48, but cancer had already narrowed him into angles. His mother, Daniel Mercer, hovered so close behind him that the wheelchair handle squeaked every time she shifted her grip. She wore a wool coat over a church blouse, as if she had come from two different lives and hadn't had time to choose one. Her lipstick had bled into the fine lines around her mouth, and her eyes kept searching my face for signs I hadn't spoken yet. Before I could even ask his pain level, she told me he had been getting weaker all week and that his oncologist wasn't doing enough. Daniel looked up at me with the kind of apology terminal patients learn too young. He said the pain had changed, that it was deeper now, not sharp but crushing, like something inside him had decided to lean its full weight against bone. Metastatic pancreatic cancer was already in his chart, along with failed rounds of treatment, escalating admissions, and a palliative consult from 2 weeks earlier. I remember the cold coffee in my hand going colder when I saw the note that mattered most: code status discussion pending final signature. When I brought him into a curtained room, the rain began ticking harder against the ambulance bay windows. A monitor beeped in the next bed, somebody coughed behind another curtain, and a nurse snapped gloves onto damp hands with the casual rhythm of routine. Daniel answered my questions without drama. He knew where the cancer had spread. He knew the odds. He knew what chest compressions would mean for a body already being hollowed out from the inside. Lorraine interrupted twice, maybe 3 times, every time he sounded too certain. I asked her gently if I could speak with him alone for a moment. She froze, then stepped back just far enough to make it clear she was leaving only because hospital walls still pretended to hold authority. When the curtain closed, the room got quieter in the way only hospitals can manage, never truly silent, but intimate enough for truth. Daniel stared at the ceiling for a long second and told me he was tired of waking up in pain just to prove he was still alive. Then he said he wanted a Do Not Resuscitate order. I have heard patients say they are tired before, but Daniel said it like a man laying down a burden he had carried farther than anyone should ask. I explained the order carefully, every implication, every irreversible edge of it. No shocks, no compressions, no violent ending disguised as rescue. He listened without flinching, then signed with a hand that trembled only at the end of his last name. When Lorraine came back in and realized what he had done, the look she gave that paper was the same look I've seen relatives give death itself. Disbelief first, then betrayal. Things held together for almost an hour, which in an emergency department can feel like peace if you are tired enough. We treated Daniel's pain, started fluids, adjusted his oxygen, and bought him the kind of comfort that medicine can still offer when cure has already left the building. His breathing softened. The deep pinch between his eyebrows eased. Lorraine sat beside him gripping a damp tissue, not crying exactly, just leaking grief in slow, stubborn increments, while I dictated notes into a chart that suddenly felt heavier than paper should. I came back to reassess him just before 2 in the morning. The hallway outside was loud with wheels and footsteps, but his room had gone unnervingly still. Daniel's skin had turned a waxy gray under the overhead light, and there was a strange delay in the way his chest tried to rise. I stepped closer, called his name, touched his shoulder, and felt the moment before the monitors understood what my hand already knew. His pulse slipped under my fingers like thread through a needle. Then the alarm hit. Everything after that happened in pieces sharp enough to remember individually. A nurse rushed in from the hall. Another reached instinctively for the code button before stopping midway, eyes cutting to me, then to the chart, then back to the patient. Lorraine was on her feet so fast the chair skidded backward into the wall. She kept saying his name at first, not loudly, almost like she thought volume might offend fate. Then she saw my face, and the sound that came out of her did not belong to language anymore. "He's arresting," my resident said, though the monitor had already said it for all of us. "DNR is active," one of the nurses answered, breathless, immediate, as if she were throwing me a rope. Lorraine didn't hear her, or refused to. She lunged toward the bed, both hands grabbing at Daniel's shoulders, begging him to breathe, begging us to do something, begging God, then us again. The room filled with beeping, with rain tapping the glass, with the dry static hiss of oxygen, and somehow her voice still cut through everything. I saw the freeze spread across my team in real time. Training pulls one way, law another, grief tears through both. My resident looked at the crash cart in the hallway like a swimmer looking at shore. One nurse had tears in her eyes and didn't seem to know it yet. Lorraine threw herself across Daniel's chest before anyone could stop her, sobbing into his hospital gown and screaming that he was her son, her baby, that papers did not know him, that signatures did not love him, that we could not just stand there and watch. I moved to the bedside and put one hand on the rail to steady myself before I touched anyone else. "Lorraine," I said, louder than I wanted, softer than the room required. He signed the order. He was clear. She turned on me with a face I still see some nights when the hospital is too quiet. "Then ignore it," she said. "Ignore it and save him." Behind me, I heard the wheels of security approaching, not fast, not aggressive, just inevitable. Daniel took one more shallow, reflexive breath. The kind the body sometimes offers, after the person has already crossed farther away than the machines can measure. Lorraine screamed when she felt it, because to a mother any movement still looks like permission. My resident whispered, "Doctor." And in that single word I heard medicine, fear, law, mercy, and the unbearable human craving to be wrong about death for just one more minute. People imagine ethical dilemmas as long conference tables, folded hands, and enough time to pretend wisdom arrives before consequence. Real ones happen standing up, in fluorescent light, with a grieving mother clawing at the last seconds of her son's life, while a team waits for your mouth to move. I knew Daniel explained it myself. I had watched him sign it. But legal clarity does not silence the ancient reflex to act when a heart stops in front of you. Part of the dilemma was medicine, but the deeper part was witness. Daniel had made his choice while fully alert, fully informed, and painfully honest. He did not want broken ribs, electric shocks, or the chaos of a code forced onto a body already ravaged by terminal cancer. He did not want his last moment to become a procedure that should have made the decision simple. Instead, Lorraine's grief turned the room into a courtroom where love argued against autonomy, and both sounded sacred. There was also the system, that cold machinery humming beneath every bedside conversation. Hospitals like to say policies protect everyone, but in moments like that policies feel like thin paper held against a flood. If I broke his DNR because his mother begged hard enough, I would be violating the one thing he had left that disease could not strip from him: the right to decide what happened to his own body. If I honored it, I would force my team to stand still while a mother watched her child die with her hands still on him. For one disorienting second, memory tried to interfere. I remembered another patient years earlier, another family, another night, when we did everything because no one wanted to be the one who stopped. We cracked ribs, flooded a dying body with noise and force, and 6 more minutes of circulation only to hand the family a death that looked like war. I had carried that case longer than the chart ever did. Daniel had looked me in the eye and asked me not to let that happen to him. "Remove the crash cart from the doorway," I said, because indecision has a smell and I could feel it spreading. My resident stared at me, searching for permission to disobey his own training. I gave him none. I told the nurse to continue comfort measures only, increase oxygen, stay with the mother, document the time. Each instruction felt cruel in its own precise way, not because it was wrong, but because right choices often arrive dressed like abandonment when grief is in the room. Security entered carefully, to officers with open hands and lowered voices, moving as if sudden motion itself would be indecent. Lorraine fought them at first, not violently, but with the wild strength of someone whose entire world is slipping away from under her palms. She kept reaching for Daniel's face, kissing his forehead, insisting he had changed his mind, though I knew he had not. I knew because he had spoken with the exhausted calm of a man who had finally chosen the shape of his own ending. So I made the decision no one thanked me for. I honored the DNR. The moment of decision lasted less than a heartbeat, but my body still remembers it as something much longer. I stepped to Daniel's bedside, listened once more for a pulse I already knew was gone, and raised my hand before anyone could start compressions out of panic or pity. "No code," I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "Honor the order." In the doorway, the crash cart stood like an accusation with drawers full of things we were not going to use. Lorraine heard those words and broke in a way that changed the room. She tore free of one officer's gentle grip and collapsed over Daniel again, pressing her cheek to his sternum as if she might lend him the rhythm of her own heart. She begged me by my first name after reading it off my badge, which somehow hurt more than being called doctor. She promised she would forgive the pain, the machines, the broken bones, anything at all, if I would only give her one more chance to keep him here. I moved closer, not away. That mattered to me then, and it matters now. If I was going to uphold his choice, I was not going to hide behind the chart while someone else absorbed the grief for me. I touched Lorraine's shoulder and told her I was sorry. Not the polished hospital sorry, not the administrative one, but the plain human version that comes from the chest. Daniel had made this decision because he was suffering. Daniel had asked us not to turn his death into violence. Daniel was being heard. Around us, my team held the line with the fragile discipline of people doing something that looks like nothing. One nurse silenced the alarm. Another turned off the automatic blood pressure cycle that kept inflating around his arm, as if the machine had not gotten the message. Rain streaked the window in long silver veins. The room smelled of plastic tubing, sweat, antiseptic, and the faint bitter trace of the coffee someone had abandoned at the station. Death rarely arrives with grandeur. Most of the time it comes under fluorescent lights. Lorraine finally let security guide her back a step, but only after she kissed Daniel's forehead 3 times in quick succession, like a ritual too old for the hospital to understand. I checked for breath again, then for heart sounds, because even when the outcome is certain, ceremony matters. "Time of death to 14 a.m., I said. The words landed with a dull finality that seemed to flatten the air. My resident looked down at his gloved hands as if he had expected them to be bloodier than this. Then the room went quiet in the way storms go quiet after tearing a roof off. Lorraine's crying dropped from a scream to a raw, animal tremor. One of the officers looked away to give her privacy she could no longer use. My nurse wiped her face with the back of her wrist and pretended it was sweat. I stood there with Daniel's signed DNR still open in the chart and understood, with a force that almost staggered me, that honoring a final wish can feel indistinguishable from breaking someone else's heart. After a death, emergency departments do not stop. That is one of the cruelest truths about them. Another ambulance backed into the bay before Daniel's body had even cooled under the sheet. A child was vomiting in triage. Someone down the hall was demanding pain medication at a volume grief never quite reaches. But inside our corner of the department, time dragged its feet. Lorraine sat in a plastic chair beside the bed, her coat half-slipped from one shoulder, staring at her son's hand as if it might still close around hers. I stayed longer than my notes required, partly because I owed Daniel that. Partly because I knew what happens when staff leave too quickly after a hard death. Families start talking to the silence. And silence is usually crueler than honesty. Lorraine did not look at me when she finally spoke. She asked whether he had been afraid at the end. I told her the truth. He had been in pain earlier, but not in panic. He had wanted peace more than more time. She nodded once, and that nod carried more defeat than anger. My resident found me at the charting station 20 minutes later, still staring at the electronic signature on the screen, as if certainty might become easier by repetition. He asked whether we had done the right thing. Young doctors never ask that after the easy saves, only after the deaths that leave fingerprints on them. I told him right and painless are not the same word. I told him autonomy means very little if it survives, only until someone else suffers enough to challenge it. He listened, but he did not look comforted. The nurses took it hard in their own private ways. Jenna cleaned the room twice, though it didn't need it. Malik disappeared into the medication room for 3 minutes and came back with eyes slightly redder than before. No one said much, because the loudest emotions in hospitals are usually the ones people hide while doing practical things. I signed the death paperwork. I called the oncologist listed in Daniel's chart. I documented the sequence carefully, every timestamp exact. Because grief makes memory unreliable and institutions trust paper more than people. Before Lorraine left, she stopped beside me in the hallway where the waxed floor reflected the overhead lights in pale broken bars. For a moment I thought she might slap me, or curse me, or tell me I had killed her son by refusing to fight. Instead, she asked a question so quiet I nearly missed it. Did he really mean it? She said. I told her yes. I told her he was lucid, specific, and certain. Something in her than lucid, as if found a place to sit. She walked out with one of the social workers just before dawn. The rain had stopped, leaving the glass gray and streaked. I watched her pass through the sliding doors into a morning that had no idea what it had cost to arrive. Back at the station, the cold kostildech beat as ever. I took one sip and set it down again. Some nights save people. Some nights protect what they asked for. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment below. I have pronounced a lot of deaths in 25 years, but not all of them stay with me. The ones that linger are rarely the loudest. They are the ones that force me to ask whether compassion means doing more or knowing when more becomes a kind of harm. Daniel stayed with me because he made that question impossible to dodge. What haunted me was not the legal part. The law was clear. The chart was clear. Daniel was clear. What haunted me was Lorraine's voice. The way love can sound almost identical to desperation when it realizes it is too late. Hospitals teach you to separate emotion from judgment, but life keeps proving that the two arrive holding hands. For days afterward, I kept thinking about signatures. A name on a DNR form looks so small compared to the weight it carries. Just ink, a date, a few boxes checked. But inside that paperwork is a person's final boundary, the last line they draw around their own body when illness has erased almost everything else they once controlled. I also thought about my team. Young doctors and nurses come into medicine believing saving a life is always the bravest choice. Experience teaches something harder. Sometimes courage is standing still while every instinct screams at you to move. Sometimes honoring a patient means accepting that love from the outside cannot overrule suffering from within. Daniel reminded me that dignity is not the same as victory. We talk too much about fighting in medicine, as if every good death must look like a battle nobly lost. He did not want one more war. He wanted an end without violence, and for all the pain in that room, he got it. That matters, even when it hurts. So, if there is a lesson I carry from that night, it is this: listen carefully when people speak before the crisis begins. Do not wait for alarms and tears to decide whose voice matters most. In the end, the kindest thing I did for Daniel looked merciless to his mother. I still grieve that. But I would make the same choice again.